today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you some of our favorite recipes for an end of summer barbecue, kind of a sourdough version. And the cool thing about this is everything that we ate at this meal was produced by us on our own homestead. That's always a very satisfying feeling when you can enjoy the fruits of your labor and the blessings that the Lord has given on the garden and the livestock for the year. First thing we're going to do is mix up my sourdough discard hamburger buns. This is something that I always make when I am short on time and we decide we're going to have burgers for supper. And so I just combine everything, including the sourdough starter and a little bit of yeast, in my Bosch mixer. Let it mix for a few minutes, and then I just put the lid on and leave it set to do its first rise right in the mixer bowl, which is so simple and easy. It's one thing I love about the Bosch is it has a tight lid on top, and so it's great for proofing any kind of bread dough. And I previously had mixed up 4 batches of my sourdough pie crust. Again, you can find all of these recipes on the blog wagonwheelhomestead.com. And the great thing about pie crust is you can mix it up ahead of time and leave it in the fridge for even a week or two, and then have it available to make not only pies but Pop-Tarts or even savory things like chicken pot pie or beef pot pie. So if you are somebody that likes to do any meal prep or meal planning for the week, mixing up a bunch of sourdough pie crust is just a great way to be able to pull a meal together quickly if you have that, pre-made in your refrigerator. And then, of course, you're also getting the long fermented health benefits from having made it up ahead of time, because anytime you add sourdough starter to a recipe and then you let it set for a while, what the starter does is it reacts upon the other flour in the recipe and ferments all of it or pre-digests it. And it reduces the amount of phytic acid that is in the flour. Phytic acid is something that inhibits nutrient absorption. So it keeps your body from absorbing some of the nutrients in your food. And when you have it fermented with sourdough starter prior to eating it, that phytic acid is broken down, and then your body can absorb all the nutrients in your food, so it's much healthier. Plus, a lot of the gluten that can be hard for some people to digest will be broken down, and like well over 90% of the gluten will be out of your flour containing recipes if you make them with sourdough, which is the big reason for making things with sourdough. Of course, it always tastes much better also. But if you make things with sourdough and let them set ahead of time, then you have what's called the long fermented health benefits that you're hearing me talk about all the time. So I am making a deep dish apple pie today with this pie crust that I had in the refrigerator. I quit making small pies for my family a long time ago because it takes like 2 pies just to feed us, or 1.5 anyway, for one meal, and it just isn't worth it to go to all that work to make a small pie. So I make deep dish pies, and this deep dish apple pie I'm making in a 12-inch cast iron pan, and I'm just adding some of my canned apples. So I like to can just plain apple slices because then you can use them in muffins, pies, apple crisp, anything you want. You're not committed to just making pie. And what I do is I just dump them right into the pie shell, add a little bit of spices and some flour to thicken it up. They're already sweetened with sugar, so they don't actually need any additional sweetener. I just stir them up, and it saves on dishes because I don't even have to, stir them up in a different bowl. And then I just add the top pie crust. You could also mix up a crumble topping if you would rather do that. But I like to, on my apple pies, I usually like to do a double crust. And so I'm just going to put the crust on the top and be sure to put a few little steam vent holes. You can cut pretty holes or you can just, cut simple little slashes. It doesn't really matter. And then I'm just going to bake this. Of course, the apples are already tender. So I'm just going to bake this until the crust is like a deep golden brown. And I also like to put a little bit of butter on the top and then sprinkle it with a little bit of sugar. It just gives the crust a really nice texture on the top. So that's optional, but it's just something that I have done with my pies for years. And so I just bake it at 350 degrees for probably an hour or so, just until it's nice and golden brown. And then, this pie still only lasts us, but it certainly lasts us for more than one meal. And I don't make this all the time. It's more of a treat. But these apples were canned from our orchard. And so there's something that we have in our pantry. Of course, our apples this year are really dinged up from hail. And so I'll probably be making applesauce with a lot of those. And it's always really nice to have canned apples in your pantry because that makes taking apple pie, and especially apple crisp, which you can even make in a crock pot, it makes it like a 5-minute dessert you can throw together and take to a potluck or a summer barbecue. And it just makes it a really fast dessert that everybody enjoys. So I just popped that pie in the oven. I'm making a small batch of apple crisp for my daughter who has celiac and can't have the sourdough pie crust. She can't have any gluten at all, even the long fermented gluten. So I'm just making a little crumble topping out of oatmeal, brown sugar, cinnamon, and butter. And I'm just going to stick that right on top of these apples in my new pan, actually, that I got from Nutrimil, which is where I get my Bosch mixer from. And they're on sale, by the way. So they're having a huge Labor Day sale. If you want to check it out, you can go to Nutrimil.com and use the code Wagon Wheel, and then you'll get an extra $20 off your purchase. Anyway, love that enameled cast iron pan that they sent me. So now we're going to shape those hamburger buns because they've been rising for a while. And usually I only let them rise for, maybe an hour. You can kind of speed it up if you have to. If you have more time, you can let them rise longer. It's not a big deal. Just using a little bit of flour and shaping them. And then I'm just going to put them on a parchment-lined baking sheet. I like to use unbleached parchment paper whenever I can because it does save me on dishes. And as you know, when you cook from scratch, it's a big blessing, but there are oftentimes a lot of dishes. So I always try to save on the dishes whenever I can. And then I'm just going to let these rise for a little while, maybe half an hour. And then I'm going to put them in the oven and bake them for 15 to 20 minutes as well. And this recipe, as well as a long fermented sourdough hamburger bun recipe that you can make way ahead of time, they are both on the blog. So you can find them there. And I'm just running out to the garden. I'm going to dig some potatoes. These are red potatoes. We also have some Yukon Gold potatoes that we grew. And it's almost time to dig these out for the year, but I like to wait until my potato plants have completely died back so that all the sugars in the plant are down into the potatoes. So we'll be digging those soon, but for now we're just sneaking out to the garden whenever we need potatoes and digging a few. It's always fun to eat potatoes fresh from the garden. They taste so much better. I don't know if it's because they have more moisture in them or why, but I always love having fresh potatoes whenever possible. I'm also grabbing an onion from my onion patch, a couple onions. We're going to make some sourdough onion rings. If you've never had sourdough onion rings, You have never really eaten onion rings. Let me just tell you, they are so good and they are so easy. So just wait till I show you how to make those. You're going to love it. First, what we're going to do is make some tallow fries. So French fries baked in beef tallow. This recipe is also on the blog. I used to keep a pot of oil on my stove in a cast iron like Dutch oven. And anytime we would want French fries, I would chop up potatoes and throw them in that pot of oil and fry them. Well, first of all, it wasn't healthy, high quality oil, right? Like tallow. And for those of you that don't know, beef tallow is a very healthy fat. It's very easily processed by your body. And, we're not anti-fat for sure, but if you put a lot of synthetic fats or synthetic oils in your body, it's very hard for your body to get rid of those. And it's a leading cause of a lot of the health problems that you see today. So anytime you can have a natural fat and do your cooking in that, it's really, really important to do so. And so I also have a tutorial actually on the blog that shows you how to make your own beef tallow, like how to render it down. It's very simple. We just keep it stored in our pantry and we use that for most all of our cooking oil and baking oil as well, unless we use butter. So, and it's also something we can produce. So what I did is I just chopped up these fries, kind of like steak fries, because I left them pretty big and chunky. And I'm just drizzling them with some beef tallow. Again, I used parchment lined baking sheets. You wouldn't have to, but I just chose to because it saves me on some dishes. And so just dabbing them with tallow, and then I'm just going to sprinkle with some garlic salt and black pepper. You can use any kind of seasoning that you want. It doesn't really matter, but I do really like garlic salt. You'll for sure want to use salt because potatoes always need lots of salt. And then we're just going to bake these in the oven at, I usually do like 425, and I have my pie in the oven, so I'm actually just going to bake them at the lower temperature that I'm baking the pie at. I actually think I bumped the oven to 375 because it's not really going to hurt the pie and it's going to cook the potatoes a little faster, but I'm not super rushed today, and so that's going to be, just fine for baking these potatoes. I am going to turn them up to the higher temperature before I'm done because it will just brown them nicely and make them nice and crispy, which of course is something that you always want with fries. And I love this recipe because it's very hands-off, and it doesn't take much oil. It doesn't take much tallow, even though tallow is a healthy fat. And it can just be baking in the oven while we're doing other things, and then we will have them ready at dinner time. And they're one of my family's favorite things. We actually make French fries quite often just because they're so easy to make this way. And now let's make the sourdough onion rings. I'm so excited to share this with you. So I had made traditional onion rings for a long time where you bread and flour the onion rings, and I thought one day to myself, I wonder what would happen if I just dip this in sourdough starter, because sourdough starter is just flour and water, right? And it's fermented, which is actually a good thing. So I tried it and it worked really well. So what I'm doing is I'm just putting sourdough discard. It works best if you have flat sourdough starter, which is often called discard, because it seems to stick to your onions better than if you have active starter. And what I did is I just added garlic salt, black pepper, and a little smoked paprika, but you can add, again, whatever spices or seasonings you'd like. And that's all I did to make the batter. And so then I'm just going to slice my onions. You want to slice them fairly thick. These are onions that we grew in the garden. These are a yellow onion. We also grow some red onions. The red onions are actually more of a keeping onion, so I usually use those later on in the year. Anyway, we're just going to cut these into slices and then peel them apart into onion rings. And one onion actually makes quite a few onion rings. So, I'm only doing 3 or 4 onions, even though it's for our whole family. And the other thing that I've done is I have heated up some beef tallow, again, in a cast iron skillet on my stove. And I like to get it fairly hot. You don't want to scorch your onion rings, but you want it fairly warm. And so I have that going over medium heat. And I'm just going to separate all of these, dip them individually into the batter, and then fry them in the skillet. And once they've fried on one side, then you can flip them over to the other side and then remove them to a platter. It's really simple, so easy, and I love the flavor that the sourdough starter gives to the onion rings, and I also love how they bake up really nice and crispy, and they're just one of our favorite things. We don't make them all the time, but we make them fairly often, and they're absolutely delicious. Here's a quick look at the pie. Now that it's done, I can turn my oven up higher. And while those onion rings are cooking, I'm going to get the burger started. So again, some of my favorite seasonings, garlic, salt, and black pepper. And I'm also using a little smoked paprika just because I have it sitting here handy. But you can use whatever seasonings you like for your burgers. And I'm just going to patty these up really quick, and we'll have those ready to stick on the grill when our hamburger buns are done baking and when our French fries and onion rings are ready to eat. And we often have ice cream, homemade ice cream for dessert. I absolutely love my homemade ice cream maker. I will link it in the description box below. It's been one of the best investments we've made in our kitchen. It's so simple. I just pour in some cream and milk, a little bit of sugar, and some vanilla. And I'm just going to stick this in and turn it on. And it will also be ready to eat with our apple pie, which, you know, apple pie always needs ice cream if you ask me. So I'm just going to turn it on, put the lid on, and the pie will be ready when we are ready to eat. course, stirring the potatoes about once through the cooking process just to make sure that they're getting covered with tallow on both sides. And this is what they look like when they're all done. They're so delicious. My kids absolutely love these. Giving the burgers a quick flip on the grill, and we are almost ready to eat. This is beef that we grew here on our homestead, and of course we harvested the tallow from those animals as well. And getting a quick milking chore in right before we eat. It's always one of the last chores of the day. It's always nice to have halter broke cows. You can bring them right up by the house and milk them while you're watching the burgers on the grill. We are so blessed. This is how this meal comes together. The hamburger buns are super soft. You're going to absolutely love making these. Just topping them with a little bit of ketchup. This is homemade ketchup and mustard. And again, our homegrown burger. And these are our sweet dill pickles that we keep in our pantry. These are from cucumbers we grew in our garden. The sweet dill pickles are our very favorite. We also make some stacker pickles and some hamburger dills, but the sweet dill pickles always seem to be what the kids bring me. So that's obviously their favorite. There's a recipe for those on the blog as well. And the tallow fries. And of course, the sourdough onion rings. And then we will finish this off with some pie and ice cream, and it's a meal fit for a king. Well, thanks for joining me for today's end of summer barbecue video. I hope that you take some extra time this late summer and early fall to spend with your loved ones, make some delicious homegrown, homemade food, and that you enjoy all of these recipes that I've shared with you today. And I will see you in the next video.